Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ronny Mkhwanazi. I am a corporate and international trade lawyer based in Johannesburg, South Africa, which is where I am based today. Welcome to another session of CEVA Talks. CEVA Talks is hosted by CEVA Insights, which is an e-magazine found on the website of CEVA Logistics. I am very delighted to be here today, where we will be discussing how to create sustainable value chains in Africa. Just to give you an idea of what our session will cover today, the objective will be to raise the awareness, incorporating sustainability into economic development on a continental scale. We'll also analyze the issues to be tackled to build up diversified and sustainable value chains in Africa. And we'll also give insightful and transformational suggestions in terms of opportunities that can be engendered in this context. Now, we all know that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement came into existence in 1 January 2021. And the idea behind what we call the AFCFTA is basically to create a single market for goods and services on the continent. Basically, as I would like to call it, for the movement of people, goods, and services, and with an idea, of course, to liberalize markets for goods and services, to contribute to the movement of capital and natural persons, as well as to lay the foundation for the establishment of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Now, without further ado, I would like to dive right into it. And of course, we are joined by very esteemed guests today. Dr. Amy Jadesimi, who is the CEO of LADOL in Nigeria, and Ms. Lebogang Letsoalo, who is the Chief Executive of Sincpoint in South Africa. Welcome, colleagues. I'm very happy to share the stage with you today. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, thank you so much. Let me just ask you to just briefly, in a few seconds, tell us who you are and why we should listen to you tonight, please. Dr. Amy, you may go for it first.
Sure. So I'm Amy Jadesimi, Managing Director of LADOL Free Zone. The company took a disused swamp in 2001 and over the last 20 years transformed it into the only fully integrated logistics space in the West Africa region. Just under 500 million has been invested, transforming this into a free zone, which is serving some of the biggest companies in the world. We operate 24/7. We're also providing space for companies to set up to make West Africa the hub for certain industries for the entire continent.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amy. Ms. Lebogang, would you like to come in as well and tell us about who you are?
All right, thank you, Ronny. Hi, everyone. My name is Lebo Letsoalo. For those of you that knows me, and they call me Lebo, the supply chain coach. So I am the CEO for Sincpoint, an organization that's focusing on end-to-end advisory solutions to the organizations. So we focus on various economic sectors, from procurement all the way to logistics, focusing on mentorship and coaching. We're focusing on advocacy in the industry in terms of supply chain management, ensuring that it is a lever that supports all the economic sectors. Part of what we do as well is driving the logistics business. So we have to focus on the trucking business and freight forwarding. And our role is to really make impact in terms of women empowerment, getting more women in the transport sectors, transforming it as well, and getting more youth to be part of this value chain. Thank you, Ronny.
Thank you so much for those brief introductions, colleagues. Well, we're talking here about a free trade agreement. Now, I don't even know where to start. There's so much work that we still need to do. I mean, of course, we know that some of the protocols have already been finalized in terms of the AFCFTA agreement and are being implemented, but there's very critical ones that are still outstanding. For example, around competition law and so forth, which is a hot issue for many countries insofar as liberalizing their borders. Now, we've had many of these or similar types of agreements in the past. And Dr. Amy, I'm going to ask you to maybe start with that. I mean, not only do we have to battle with making the AfCFTA work, but you have the various regional, agreements, ECOWAS, SADC, etc. on the continent. Those ones are still battling themselves in terms of finding alignment within the various regions. And now we have this new Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. How is this different? What will be different in terms of what we've done before as a continent and so on? Thank you.
So thank you. So I think that's a really important point of reference, is the fact that we have regional agreements. We're in Nigeria, we're part of ECOWAS. So what's the big deal about the African Continental Agreement? The big deal is that we, number one, have learned, we've had ECOWAS for over 30 years. And when we put it together, we didn't really think through all the details of what we needed to do to make this work. The primary reason the EU worked is that the EU had a free trade agreement amongst countries that were purchasing finished goods from each other. Finished goods is the absolute key. So we didn't do enough work historically on the aspects of these regional agreements that dealt with the drive to create industries. In other words, I think in this day and age, we all understand that this free trade agreement, this Pan-African free trade agreement, is targeting industrialization. It's about creating jobs, it's about creating wealth, and we're leveraging the Pan-African market in order to do that. And that's exactly why the European Union was so successful. After the Second World War, Europe was in an abysmal state. They had to build up their industry, some of them almost from scratch. And they did that by leveraging the EU market. So we have to bear in mind what we're targeting. We have to learn from our past mistakes. And as you said, those areas around local content and competition, we have to look at them really carefully. And the first thing we have to understand is we're not in competition with each other. We often talk about this within Nigeria, where, regional politics comes into play, even within one country. We have to move beyond that. We have to understand that African countries have to unite on every level and not look at each other as the competition, but look at each other as collaborators, look at each other as sources of information, of expertise, of raw materials, because this is about creating a thriving market where we are exchanging finished goods amongst ourselves.
Let me bring Ms. Lebogang there. I mean, based on what Dr. Amy just said now, how do you think the AfCFTA will lead to new African markets?
Listen, I always say that I always like taking a step back, Ronny, in terms of where the African Union really started. I mean, when it was established around 2002, it was really around accelerating the intercontinental integration process within Africa as a whole. And then, further to what Dr. Amy has said, speaking of COMESA, which has been driving Africa, speaking of EAC as well, that has been driving Africa, speaking of SADC as well, which has been driving us, we have not been able to achieve what we wanted as Africa in terms of industrialization, in terms of beneficiation as well. And one of them as well is that there were a couple of studies that has been done, one by the African Union Commission, which looked at issues that speaks to intra and inter-trade pertinent issues, but also the Agenda 2063, which has never really met what we want to do. And we're talking about the Africa Way. And this Africa Way now, let's look back at what Africa is looking like in terms of business. I mean, 2%, we account 2% of global trade as Africa. Something wrong with that. And then if you're talking about intra-Africa, intra-continental, it's around 17% that we are talking about. So what does it mean around Africa? If you start looking at the statistic in terms of Europe, in terms of Asia as well, we're speaking to around 50 to 60 to 70% as well. So something is wrong in terms of what we're exporting and what we are importing. Now, the question that you are asking now is, what difference will it make? Because then I start looking back and say that as Africa, we have a lot of resources. And speaking to cocoa, we look at the imports, look at cocoa, look at the commodities that we are in fact exporting outside of Africa. And those commodities comes back to Africa as a complete product. That means we still have a market in Africa, but what we are doing is that we have the resources that we are giving to someone in Asia, someone in Europe to process for us, and they can come and sell it back to us. For me, something is wrong. I mean, we can look at the whole lot, a long list in terms of Africa, in terms of the products that we are exporting. So in terms of the opportunity, looking at the Africa that we want, Africa Free Continental Trade Area is changing the landscape completely. In terms, and we're going to talk about the issue of the it's changing the landscape in terms of integration, in terms of reducing poverty in Africa, in terms of getting more women to participate in the industry. It has to also look at how we ensure that next time we are impacted by COVID, we are ready, because our reliance as well will be minimized as part of the process. So it's changing the Africa landscape completely in terms of that reliance, where Africa can trade amongst each other based on the resources that they have, and also looking at the industrialization that is built, increasing the opportunities in terms of jobs, the 14 million jobs that can be created via Africa. That's exactly what we are looking forward to.
I'm glad you mentioned the issue of beneficiation, and I mean, one also has to be realistic and practical about the fact that Africa is not equally developed, right? Some countries, for example, do not have any form of manufacturing capacity or the infrastructure to do that. So, Dr. Amy, if I may bring you in here, then how do you see this process, this transition happening, where we can utilize our specific African commodities to manufacture in Africa?
So I think there are two things. Firstly, we have to recognize ourselves as our market. To the extent that we're trying to process cocoa into chocolate and sell it to Belgium, there are just too many hurdles, and this is exactly what the EU faced after the Second World War, because they were starting from a low industrial base. So now they're being asked to play in an unlevel playing field. If I'm selling chocolate bars amongst African countries, I'm not saying I'm going to lower the quality or anything like that. But what I am saying is that through the Continental Free Trade Agreement, I'm going to be playing on a level playing field. I'm going to be playing with people who are incentivized to trade with me, as opposed to trading with people whose incentive is not to trade with me, but to keep me as purely a commodity provider. And the link between countries that are trading amongst each other being based on equality and mutual benefit is really critical, because that goes to how successful that trading relationship is going to be. So the first thing is, we have to understand that we're targeting other African countries with our finished goods. And that's the essence of what this agreement is about. The second thing we have to look at is, okay, how are we going to fund these markets? Different countries will be starting from a different base. So if you look at Nigeria, one of the reasons we set up in Nigeria as we did is because we saw the Nigerian market was large enough on its own to justify quite significant investment in industrial capacity. And that if we could provide an ecosystem, which the free zone essentially is, where people will have reliable power and water and safety and security and high international standards of HSE and so on. So if we can provide an environment where you can build this industry, the Nigerian market on its own is already large enough to make it worth your while financially to build facilities and industrialize to service that local market. And then you have the Continental Free Trade Agreement as a bonus. So you're going to have some countries that industrialize on a larger scale than other countries. And Nigeria is one of those countries that could be a hub location for some quite large industries. But then you have other countries that are a little bit smaller, that will specialize in other parts of the business value chain, but anything from intellectual property development to to financial resources, and so on. And again, you see this pattern played out in other parts of the world where different countries within the free trade area have different specializations. And by focusing on what their natural advantage is, or developing natural advantages based on their population and their landmass and their resources, they're able to fund that development. So I think we have to look at specialization. We have to look at regional hubs, particularly in this first stage. And then, as I said, these regional hubs and these specializations across different countries are now going to target each other as their markets, as opposed to looking to sell their products into the rest of the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amy. Let me bring you back in, Ms. Lebogang. I mean, what type of capacities and infrastructure do you think the continent needs for us to be able to execute what Dr. Amy just said now?
I think Dr. Amy, in fact, has already said some of the things that we require. I mean, if you look at after, I mean, you call it a global game changer. But a couple of things are needed. There is a policy side, and it's not infrastructure. However, everything that has to move requires some kind of infrastructure. Number one, in terms of roads as well. If you look at the transportation, the infrastructure in Africa is horrible as well. It's one of the things that we really have to look at. Number two, you can look at our border gates as well. I mean, if you look at Africa as a whole, some of our border gates in Africa, they are not equipped to facilitate intra-trading as well. So we also have to really focus on issues that speaks to technology, how we enable them as well, and how we also look at policy, the processes on how we operate around that. The tariffs that speaks to intertrade, very important that we look at that. If you talk about infrastructure as well, it's very important that we think of issues that speaks to water as well, access to water. Very important. I always look at, the Department, Republic of Congo. DRC has got Grand Inga, and they always say that if you were to build a hydro station, with Inga project, you will be able to really electrify the entire Africa. That's what they say, and what has happened around that. So there's a whole lot of enablers around that in terms of we have after, number one. But the second thing is that everything that we manufacture has to be moved. We need to create some factories. We need to create warehouses as well. I mean, the issue of the warehouse just became very eminent in terms of COVID cases, in terms of storage as well, in terms of the vaccine as well. We never even thought around that. So it's one of the things that we have to look at in terms of the storage. And a whole lot of other things is really being able to enable this infrastructure to function as well, because yes, we can have infrastructure, and we have seen that in Africa where we build some infrastructure but it's not even utilized. So building capacity and the skills is just as important. Just adding on what Dr. Amy said, that yes, it's all good, we will build this infrastructure, but we have all these resources as well, but where is the capability to be able to utilize such? Very important that we invest in there. So there's an infrastructure, but we need to know how to utilize that. We know, in terms of technology, how it has taken over in terms of the businesses as well. Are we able to use that? Because remember, we want to use after as an enabler of building small businesses as well, and equipping the youth to be able to participate in this industrialization. So all of that is very critical in terms of the process, to really say that we have to build at both capacity and the skills to be able to utilize that as part of after. It's one area that I believe that it has been lacking when you look at Africa as compared to all developed countries, in that we have all these resources, there is no infrastructure, and we also don't have the skills to be able to utilize. That is why we are not able to compete equally with all of these countries.
Let me bring...
Okay, sorry, the one last thing that I just remembered is the issue of shipping in terms of maritime.
Yes.
When I look at South Africa and I say that we don't have that ship with a flag, we don't have the South African, as South Africa. So what does that really mean? We're still utilizing international organization in terms of our shipping. So what are we doing as Africa? What are we doing? Because now, if you look at the gateway in terms of Africa as a whole, then we should be able to come together as this integrated community in terms of continent and really say that let's build the infrastructure that speaks to now moving all these commodities around it and really utilizing that infrastructure. So we need to invest more onto that.
I'm very glad that you mentioned the issue around the vessels, because yes, it's correct. 98% of South African imports come via the ships into our country. And that, of course, is a big security risk for our country, because you can imagine with, for example, what happened recently where some countries came up and put bans on other countries because of, perceived spikes. It really shows that your supply chain can actually just be disrupted or curtailed immediately, because of those kind of issues. But I mean, one of the criticisms rather, or the doomsayers of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement speak about the fact that the idea is tariff elimination between African nations, and that most African countries actually depend on these tariffs, for their sustainability and et cetera, et cetera. So how do we overcome that? Because you're now asking one country to say, please let go of this tariff, for the greater good, and what do I get in return as a country? How would you offset that kind of criticism? Dr. Amy, if I can ask you to maybe come in on that one as a start.
Thank you. I mean, just picking up on, just continuing the thought about investment.
Yes.
One thing to bear in mind is that we need to invest in our local currencies, because if we do that, we will have more than enough money, because there's always this chicken and egg about who's going to pay for it and how we're going to get the investment. Let's pay for it ourselves with our local currencies and build roads and trains and so on, because if we ask other people to build our infrastructure, all they'll do is build roads out of Africa. They'll build lots of ports on the coastline, and they'll build lots of trains that go inland out towards, the ports, so that they can keep taking commodities out. So we have to build the infrastructure ourselves. But in terms of these tariffs, I really think that's a bit of a false narrative. What makes money for a country is two things. You have your production and you have your consumption. And neither of those is helped by tariffs. Because obviously, if you put tariffs on, then other countries will put tariffs on. So both those things, neither of those things are particularly enhanced. Even if you argue that you take the money from the tariffs and invest it in productivity, that doesn't really work. So we know that from the reality is that free trade works. What is the real danger here? The real danger here is not losing the tariffs. The danger is that we lower the tariff barriers without significantly increasing the requirements for local manufacturing and being specific about local engineering as well as local manufacturing, and saying, okay, we need to see the intellectual capacity that went into this. We need to see where this was designed and where it was manufactured. And unless it was designed and manufactured and even conceived in Africa, it can't flow through as free trade, because our biggest issue is dumping. Our biggest issue is that somebody will set up a warehouse in an African country, import finished goods from somewhere in the world, and feed those into this free trade area, as if it's coming from this African country. So to me, that is by far the biggest danger we face. There's no other danger that even comes close to that. So what we have to do is embed requirements about local content in terms of conceiving the idea, designing the solution, engineering the solution, manufacturing the solution, maintaining the solution. All these products need to be in every sense made in Africa. That's what's going to drive the change. And the idea that we need tariffs in order to feed our people is really quite tragic, because it highlights the issue, and it highlights the negative cycle that we've been trapped in, if that's the kind of thinking that's prevalent in the continent.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
I just like to remind our guests and attendees that please do send us your questions in the chat box. And whilst they're doing that, I saw one comment here that said that Africa should basically require some of the European countries to set up factories on the African continent. On the back of what Dr. Amy just said now, Ms. Lebogang, do you think that is a solution, or would it help us in any way?
So just to make sure that I understand, Ronny, so we are saying that other European countries or Asian countries must come and really, I will make an example of Kenya. I will make an example of Zambia. I will make an example of a couple of countries that are now inclusive of South Africa as to where we brought some investors, and those investors came with the money, and then there's certain agreements that has been made. By the way, we don't know if our countries have been sold or not exactly, and all of that is all in the name of setting up a factory, setting up a road network as part of the infrastructure, and so forth. We don't know about that. So is that what we require? For me, we have major skills. I think Africa has built a lot of construction projects for the past few years. So do we need someone to come and build that for us? I don't agree so. For me, it's the issue of intellectual property on the manufacturing, the skills, the reverse engineering that is needed. That's the capacity that we need. That's what we are missing. But we've already built, in fact, part of that is part of the pipeline. Yes, we need a bit of support, but if you're telling me about factories, definitely no. We do have that that capability. So now, and I want to touch a bit, and what Dr. Amy has just been talking about in terms of, in terms of the money side, in terms of the tariffs and so forth. I mean, I read somewhere where they are saying that Africa needs close to 130 to 170 billion dollars a year, and I think we have a financing gap in between for around 68. I don't remember 68 to 100 billion. That we have. That's a gap that we have. So now we're also talking about the tariffs. Everyone thinking that it's a solution. It is definitely not a solution for our country. We know exactly what is. We know our currency, and we know that is why after is around integration. It's all about integration, but yes, we must always remember that as part of this process, there will always be the losers and those that are gaining from the pact. It's one of the things that's the biggest challenge that we have to be aware of, because out of these 55 countries, we have poverty-stricken economies as well. So it's one of the things that we really have to be aware of as part of this process, that when we think of the bigger solutions in terms of investment, in terms of the monetary funds that we require as Africa, our reliance from these big global companies, global investors must be limited. For me, I always say that after is one of the elements that will help us escape the colonial legacy, period. That's it. So let's build it for Africa. Let's just build it for Africa. But we need to be taking cognizance of the infrastructure that is needed, the investment that is needed as well. And the tariffs is definitely not a solution to that.
Thank you so much. Dr. Amy, there's a question here that says that air freight costs to, I think it wants to say, in Africa, doubled today due to the Omicron variant. What are the solutions that logistics and supply chain stakeholders could probably put in place to tackle this increase, the air freight cost increase, I suppose? That's the question there, yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, let's unpack that comment. The air freight didn't double because of the Omicron variant. The air freight doubled because international companies and governments outside of Africa made decisions that drastically and negatively impacted the everyday lives of Africans and our public policy and our businesses. So within a matter of hours, completely outside of our control, these devastating decisions were made. And when various African leaders in the civil society, in the private sector, in the public sector spoke up and said these decisions are wrong, they were ignored completely. So what is the solution to that? The solution to that is to obviously decrease our reliance on systems we have zero control over and which take zero cognizance of our positions. Because until we can stand on our own 2 feet, and until we can stand and negotiate with the world from a position of greater equality, all of these actions will continue and probably worsen as things get tighter and tougher in the West, and they realize they have to change their way of life, their way of doing business. Of course, we are going to be less and less protected, so to speak, from the negative impacts of these decisions. So this is a wake-up call. This is another wake-up call, if we needed another one, but it's, yes, another wake-up call to say, look, Africa, you're on your own. We have to figure these solutions out ourselves. Why don't we have our own airlines? Why don't we have our own industrial capacity where we're manufacturing our own vaccines, we're manufacturing our own finished goods, and we're trading amongst ourselves? So if tomorrow a country on the other side of the world says, well, we're closing our doors to you with giving us 2 hours notice, it really won't have much of an impact. And there's really no other way to overcome that, other than standing up and taking care of ourselves. And the African Continental Free Trade Agreement gives us a tool, a very powerful tool, if used correctly, that we can use to do that.
I like that, a powerful tool if used correctly. We're talking about sustainable value chains, and obviously our discussion would be incomplete if we didn't touch on sustainability. So how do we then ensure that there's sustainability for the long term in terms of the new business model for the continent? Mrs. Lebogang, if you can come in there, please.
I am Mrs. Lebogang now.
Yeah, I'm trying to balance. Yes, I'm trying to balance between Doctor and Mrs.
Indeed, Ronny. For me, Ronny, I think the most important part of what we need to do in terms of creating sustainability, like I said, I think earlier, sustainability comes with really building the capacity and the skills. It starts there. That's the first thing, because if we have the knowledge, we have the power. If we build up our own, everyone has always spoken around, having an African bond, an African currency. And no one really wants to listen to that and say, what African currency are we talking about? And sustainability comes with that. But sustainability comes with managing our political environment as well, because we need some sustainability in terms of our political environment. Currently, from like we've said previously, there's been a lot of treaties that has been signed, the tripartite and so, but we have not really seen much of the transition around that. So I always say that the devil is really in the implementation. So we need to start looking at the bottom-up approach to create some sustainability in terms of after. Look at cross-border solutions, look at water resources, looking at the markets, regional energy as well. Those are some of the things that we have to start looking at, the basics that we need. We need to start reducing poverty in Africa. If we start reducing poverty in Africa, creating more, those 40 million jobs that we are talking about, and now increasing our intra-continental trading, you start building some form of sustainability as well. Another aspect that I would want us to look at in creating sustainability is issue of corruption in Africa. That is always eminent on various aspects. If you look at the issue of corruption in terms of the perception index, look at Africa, looking at South Africa, looking at Nigeria, and some of these African countries, it's still a bit shocking because you look at the perception of corruption in terms of the public sector, but obviously it excludes a bit of private sector around it. But the perception index in terms of corruption, it's very clear that with most African countries, there's a lot of corruption. Not that it doesn't happen in other countries, but we need that stability. We need to also eliminate monopolies in Africa. Very important that we do that. If we start eliminating monopolies, now we're creating more competition as well, but also with policies that are driving towards localization. Let us build proudly African products. You start that. I mean, I remember in South Africa, we have Proudly SA, Proudly South African brand. Let's start having Proudly African products brands in terms of Africa that is enabled by AFTA. Sustainability is created by the resources, by the skills, by creating that brand and the funding as well, the investment that is needed around us.
Now, Dr. Amy, how do you think we translate, the sustainability into infrastructure and facilities building, especially trade-related infrastructure?
Sure. So the thing I love most about sustainability, as defined as the 17 sustainable goals from the United Nations that were ratified in 2014, is that if you look at sustainability through that lens, sustainability is equal to profitability. In other words, private sector businesses that pursue business models and business practices that are in line with achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are going to be more profitable than companies that don't do that. And I was part of a study that looked at this through the Business and Sustainable Development Commission 5 years ago. And that study identified $12 trillion of business opportunities that come from pursuing 4 verticals in the new sustainable business arena. So if you look at, we looked at energy, we looked at urbanization, we looked at agriculture and healthcare. And in those areas, there are so many new business opportunities that will lead to a better return for the investment, for the investor, but also a better product, a better solution for your client and for your customer that currently aren't being really looked at in the West. Because in the West, they have to backward integrate. They have to take care of the status quo. So they've already industrialized in a manner that is not sustainable and that has created gross inequalities across the world and within their countries. We have an opportunity to industrialize sustainably using all the knowledge we've gained over the past 100 years on what is the best way to industrialize, using all the knowledge gained from the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And these goals came from a global analysis. I think, Amina Mohammed, the current deputy of the UN, as Deputy UN Secretary General, went to almost every country, the member state of the United Nations, to put those goals together. So it's no surprise that there's such a brilliant set of targets for the world to try and achieve, to make things better. So if you are an entrepreneur, small, medium, large, even if you're a multinational and you're thinking of partnering with an African to set up a business in Africa, if you're looking at infrastructure development, if you're looking at road development, you've got to think about doing it using new technologies with a sustainable focus. Is the concrete I am using sustainable? Is there an alternative to concrete? Can I use recycled products? Can I build a factory that recycles? Can I use renewable energy in part or in full? Can I build a circular economy? I mean, at LADOL, we're turning our entire free zone, our entire ecosystem into a circular economy. We're bringing agricultural processing into that. And by doing that, we're going to reduce the cost of power in the zone by 60 to 90%. So building a sustainable business is not a nice thing to do. It is the correct thing to do if you want to maximize the return to your shareholders and the value to your clients.
Thank you so much. And it's always been my view that one of the challenges, I'm actually on record with a quotation that says that ignorance can be a barrier to trade. So clearly, sustainability is also important insofar as the right education, the right business skills, and the whole reorientation of African business people to say that business is not just in my country or in this one corner I'm sitting at. You have a whole vast continent of 1.something billion people that can actually benefit from what you have to offer. So we really need a whole re-education as well from a sustainability point of view, insofar as making sure that for the sustainable developments on the continent. We have 5 minutes remaining, colleagues. We've got one last question from the audience, and the question is, I'm curious to know how documentation documentation for cross-border movement should be best managed, and what realistic timelines are we looking at for infrastructure development? So it's a double-barrel question, if you like. I don't know. I think Dr. Amy, I'll give you the one on the border movement in terms of the documents, and perhaps Ms. Lebogang, you can deal with the other one around the timelines for infrastructure development, if you have any, of course. Dr. Amy?
Look, documentation, we probably have some of the most bureaucratic countries in the world. So what I would say we need to do, and the Nigerian government has already gone quite far in doing this, is make everything virtual. Everything needs to be electronic. You need to go online, process what you need to process, and get your results within 24 hours. It needs to be transparent, so everybody knows what it's supposed to cost, everybody knows what the rules are, and everybody's playing by the same rules. And there needs to be accountability so that when you go online and try to process your way bill or try to submit your manifest, and there's a problem, or somebody is trying to charge you more than they should charge you, there should be consequences. I think the AU has to be involved in this so that we can set a Pan-African standard. And then all we need to do is bring everybody up to the same level in terms of this electronic processing.
Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Lebogang, do you have any ideas how long it's going to take us to get our infrastructure sorted on the continent?
What I can share with you, with the colleagues here, is that it's interesting question, because a few weeks ago I went to Lebombo border, heading into Mozambique, as part of my duties, and it's so amazing that the delays, the paperwork, and what is happening around it. So I just want to add, over and above what Dr. Amy said, we must remember that when you are dealing with cross-border movement, firstly, you must have a permit, but also the most critical aspect around it is that you need to have a freight forwarder and a clearing agent. So in most instances, most shippers will already ensure that we have all the paperwork, all the documentation ready before you even get to the border gate. But normally what happens is that you normally probably have to go through a way bridge, like our organization with Sunrail, and then what happens, there's also delays on the route. That's what we are seeing. But now I'm going to bring an element of the stakeholders that are part of the of cross-border. You have the Department of Home Affairs, you have the cross-border road transportation agency that offers the permits. You have the police as well there that are managing the process. So one of the challenges that we are seeing, and especially coming from this question, is that you may find that the technology is enabled, and I'm using South Africa as an example, when you are going into Lebombo. But as soon as you get to the border gate, the handover from a truck coming from South Africa into another country is manual work. So you can see now we're already delayed. So the investment in terms of the timelines, I have seen now a lot of transition that comes with Africa, with South Africa now, trying to move towards that, because I think now we understanding the importance of cross-border movement and how we need to now start developing the infrastructure around various countries. The last thing in terms of that, and I just want to close it, is we have seen a one-stop border post. That's one of the things that we are encouraging, a one-stop border post, and that requires infrastructure development for various countries. We've seen it for Zimbabwe as well, but what has happened is that in terms of the timelines, it creates a lot of delays in terms of the road, with the trucks, with the people movement as well. So in terms of the timelines, it depends on the country, in terms of the investment, if they are willing to be able to do that, and understanding that there are various stakeholders that has to contribute to that.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I'm happy that today we were focusing on solutions. Every time we have these kind of fora, we talk about challenges facing Africa, and it's quite refreshing, I must say, to have this type of discussion with you. We have reached the end of our session, and I would, of course, like to thank our esteemed guests for a very insightful, contribution. We'd like to thank CEVA Talks for making this possible, and of course, please continue to send us your questions questions, and we will allocate them between Dr. Amy and Ms. Lebogang in the course of time for contact. So thank you very much to CEVA. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you for your time. And Salani Gashe, which in South Africa means goodbye. Thanks a lot and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank
Ronny.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Cheers. Goodbye.